She stole the house, the land, the car. I was left with Grandma's recipe book. That book changed everything. So here I am, 34 years old, sitting in my tiny rental apartment in the Chicago suburbs, wondering how the hell my life got flipped upside down faster than a pancake on Sunday morning. You know those people who always claim they're the good kid in the family? Yeah, that was me. Matthew Sullivan, the responsible one. The guy who never missed a family dinner and always remembered Mom's birthday. I spent my days managing spreadsheets at some soul-crushing corporate office where the highlight of everyone's week was arguing over who ate Karen's yogurt from the break room fridge. Real exciting stuff, let me tell you. But hey, it paid the bills and kept me close to home, which seemed important back then. 5 years ago, everything changed when Mom got sick. Diabetes hit her hard, and her heart started giving out like an old Chevy in winter. The doctors threw around words like chronic condition and lifestyle changes, but what they really meant was that Mom needed someone to take care of her. Now, I had a sister, Kate, who was supposed to be the family success story. Lawyer, married to some hotshot banker named Ted. 2 perfect kids who probably knew their multiplication tables before they could walk. But when Mom needed help, Kate suddenly became busier than a one-legged cat in a sandbox. Her excuse was always the same: career, family, responsibilities. You know, the important stuff that apparently didn't include taking care of the woman who raised us. So I did what any decent son would do. I packed up my mediocre life, left my overpriced apartment, and moved into Mom's old ranch-style house on Maple Street. The place still smelled like Grandma Eleanor's cinnamon cookies, which hit me right in the feels every single time I walked through that front door. Those 5 years were probably the best and worst of my life. I learned how to cook Mom's favorite meals, drove her to more doctor appointments than I could count, and listened to her tell the same stories about her youth over and over again. She'd talk about dancing at the local hall, about how she met Dad, about Grandma Eleanor's legendary baking skills that could make grown men weep with joy. Kate would swing by maybe once a month, usually on holidays or when she needed to feel better about herself. She'd waltz in with her designer purse and her perfectly styled hair, staying just long enough to take a few selfies for social media before rushing off to her real life. The woman had an excuse for everything. But here's where life decided to throw me a curveball that would make a major league pitcher jealous. 3 weeks before everything went to hell, I got a call from my boss. There was this opportunity in Seattle, a business trip that could finally get me that promotion I'd been chasing for years. 3 weeks of meetings, presentations, and networking events that could change my entire career trajectory. I stared at that phone for about 10 minutes, knowing I couldn't leave Mom alone. So I swallowed my pride and called Kate, practically begging her to step up for once in her life. Her first response was predictably selfish. Just hire a caregiver. Throw money at the problem. Anything to avoid actually doing something herself. But then something weird happened. I heard Ted whispering something in the background, and suddenly Kate's tune changed completely. She agreed to stay with Mom, but only if I covered all the expenses. The way she smiled when she said it gave me chills, like a shark that just smelled blood in the water. But I was desperate, so I agreed. Those 3 weeks in Seattle were supposed to be my big break. I called Mom every single day, sometimes twice, just to hear her voice and make sure she was okay. She sounded fine, maybe a little tired, but she kept telling me how proud she was that I was finally getting my shot at success. Kate would occasionally grab the phone and assure me everything was under control. On the 3rd week, just as I was wrapping up the most important presentation of my career, my phone rang. Kate's voice was shaking when she told me Mom was in the hospital. Heart attack, they said, happened suddenly while she was sleeping. I dropped everything, caught the first flight home, and spent the entire trip praying to every deity I could remember from Sunday school. I made it to the hospital just in time to hold Mom's hand as she slipped away. She looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines that couldn't fix what was really broken. I sat there for hours afterward, wondering if I'd made the right choice leaving her, even for something as important as my career. The funeral was a blur of casseroles, condolences, and relatives I hadn't seen since high school. Kate played the grieving daughter perfectly, dabbing her eyes with tissues and accepting sympathy like she'd been Mom's primary caregiver all along. I bit my tongue, so hard I probably should have gotten stitches. Then came the reading of the will, and that's when my world completely imploded. Sitting in that stuffy lawyer's office, surrounded by leather-bound books and the smell of old paper, I listened as the attorney read through Mom's final wishes. Kate got the house. Kate got the savings account. Kate got Mom's old Toyota Camry that barely ran, but held 20 years of memories. Hell, Kate even got Mom's jewelry collection, including Grandma Eleanor's wedding ring that I'd always assumed would be split between us. I just sat there, numb, as the reality hit me like a freight train. Kate avoided eye contact the entire time, suddenly finding her manicured nails absolutely fascinating. When I finally managed to find my voice and ask what happened to the original will that split everything equally, the lawyer explained that Mom had come in just 2 weeks before she died to make changes. Kate's explanation was simple and devastating. She'd been there during Mom's final days. She'd earned the right to inherit everything, and besides, I was single with no family to support, as if being alone somehow made me less deserving of my own mother's love and legacy. The smart thing would have been to fight it, to hire my own lawyer and drag Kate through the courts until the truth came out. But every time I thought about it, I could hear Mom's voice telling me that family was more important than money, that blood was thicker than water, and all those other sayings that sounded noble until your own blood decided to stab you in the back. Kate gave me exactly 1 week to collect my personal belongings from the house. 1 week to pack up 5 years of my life and 34 years of memories. The generosity was overwhelming. I spent that week wandering to the house like a ghost, touching everything one last time before saying goodbye forever. I found myself recording videos on my phone, capturing the creak of the floorboards in the hallway, the way the afternoon light filtered to the kitchen window, the little corner where Mom used to sit and read her romance novels. Every room held 1,000 memories. The living room where we'd watch countless Cubs games together, celebrating and commiserating depending on whether they were having a good season or their usual heartbreaking one. The dining room where we'd shared quiet dinners and she'd tell me about her day. Her bedroom, which still smelled faintly of her perfume and made my chest tight every time I walked past it. But it was in the kitchen where I found something that would change everything, though I didn't know it at the time. Hidden behind a stack of Mom's recipe magazines, tucked away in a corner cabinet like it was waiting for me to discover it, was a small cardboard box held together with rubber bands that had seen better days. Inside was a yellowed notebook with handwriting I recognized immediately. Grandma Eleanor's perfect cursive script, the kind they don't teach in schools anymore. It was her recipe collection, dozens of pages filled with instructions for cookies, cakes, and pastries that had made our family gatherings legendary. The pages were stained with flour and butter, evidence of years of love and creation. Each recipe had little notes in the margins. Add extra vanilla for the holidays, Tommy's favorite. Make double batch. Best served warm with coffee. When Kate saw me holding the notebook, she barely glanced at it before shrugging dismissively. Old recipes weren't worth anything to her. Just another piece of clutter from a generation that measured ingredients by feel rather than precise measurements. She told me I could throw it away if I wanted, or keep it if I was planning to take up baking as a hobby. My friends thought it was hilarious when I showed up at the local bar with a notebook full of cookie recipes. They made jokes about me opening a bakery, about trading my business suit for an apron, about whether I'd start wearing a chef's hat to work. Everyone had a good laugh at my expense, but I didn't mind. They didn't understand what that notebook represented. That night, alone in my depressing apartment with its thin walls and broken air conditioner, I opened Grandma Eleanor's notebook for the first time. The smell hit me immediately, cinnamon, vanilla, and something else I couldn't quite identify, but that reminded me of childhood Sundays and holiday mornings. As I turned those fragile pages, reading her careful instructions and loving notes, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Mom died. Connection. It was like Grandma Eleanor was sitting right there beside me, ready to guide my hands and teach me the secrets she'd passed down through generations. The first recipe that caught my eye was for her famous cinnamon sugar cookies, the ones that had made every family gathering feel like Christmas morning. Her note at the top of the page was simple but profound. Cookies for the soul, made with love, served with joy. I found myself laughing and crying at the same time, holding that notebook like it was the most precious thing in the world. Because in that moment, I realized it was, Kate could have a house, the car, and all the money. She could have every material thing Mom left behind. But she couldn't have this. She couldn't have the recipes that carried our family's history, the traditions that connected us to something bigger than ourselves. Sitting there in my cramped kitchen, surrounded by takeout containers and the remnants of my bachelor lifestyle, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to learn to bake. Not just for cookies, but for something deeper, a connection to the women who came before me, a way to honor their memory that went beyond legal documents and inheritance disputes. I didn't know it then, but that yellowed notebook would become my roadmap to a completely different life. It would teach me that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but the love and wisdom passed down through generations. Sometimes the greatest gifts come in the smallest packages, hidden away in kitchen cabinets and waiting for the right moment to be discovered. As I closed a notebook and set it carefully on my kitchen counter, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since Mom's funeral, I had a purpose. I had a connection to something bigger than my own grief and anger. I had Grandma Eleanor's recipes, and somehow that felt like having a piece of my family back. The next morning, I would start my journey into the world of baking, armed with nothing but determination and a notebook full of love. But that night, I just sat in my quiet apartment, feeling like I wasn't quite as alone as I thought. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen when you're not looking for them, hidden in plain sight, and waiting for the right moment to change your life forever. Saturday morning hit me like a splash of cold water. My apartment felt smaller than usual, if that was even possible. The walls seemed to be closing in, and that notebook sat on my counter like it was daring me to do something with it, instead of just staring at it like some kind of shrine. I opened it again, running my fingers over Grandma Eleanor's perfect handwriting. Her first recipe practically jumped off the page. Cinnamon sugar cookies for the soul. I actually laughed out loud at that. For the soul? I could barely make scrambled eggs without setting off the smoke detector in my building. But something about those words hit different that morning. Maybe it was the way the sunlight was streaming through my tiny kitchen window, or maybe it was just desperation, but I decided to give it a shot. What's the worst that could happen? Burn down my apartment and finally get out of my lease? The grocery store trip was an adventure in itself. I wandered the baking aisle like a tourist in a foreign country, squinting at ingredient labels and trying to figure out what the difference was between all-purpose flour and bread flour. The teenage cashier looked at my cart full of baking supplies and asked if I was starting a bakery. If only she knew I was just a guy trying to connect with his dead grandmother through cookies. Back in my kitchen, I spread out all the ingredients like I was performing surgery. Butter, sugar, eggs, flour, cinnamon, vanilla extract. Simple enough, right? Grandma Eleanor's instructions seemed straightforward. But there were all these little notes in the margins that made me realize baking was more art than science. The first batch was a disaster of epic proportions. I'm talking hockey pucks disguised as cookies. They came out of the oven, looking like something you'd use to fix a pothole. When I tried to bite one, I seriously thought I might chip a tooth. My upstairs neighbor probably wondered why someone was hammering at midnight. But here's the thing about failing spectacularly. It either breaks you or makes you stubborn as hell. I've always been the stubborn type. The second batch was slightly better, if you considered charcoal an improvement over concrete. At least these ones were edible, even if they tasted like I'd accidentally dumped half the salt shaker into the dough. I could almost hear Grandma Eleanor laughing at my disasters. She used to tell me that baking was like life. You add love, and somehow everything works out, even when it doesn't look like it will. That woman had a saying for everything, and somehow they all made sense when you needed them most. By the third weekend, I was starting to get the hang of things. The cookies actually looked like cookies instead of failed science experiments. They were golden brown, soft in the middle, and smelled like childhood memories wrapped in cinnamon. When I bit into one, I swear I could taste Grandma Eleanor's kitchen, could feel her standing right there beside me, nodding with approval. That's when I made the mistake of bringing a batch to work on Monday morning. I set the container down in our break room, thinking maybe my coworkers would appreciate some homemade treats instead of the stale donuts that corporate usually provided. Steve from accounting made some joke about me having a midlife crisis and taking up domestic activities. Jennifer from HR asked if this was my new side hustle. Everyone had something funny to say, until they actually tried one. The office went quiet in a way I'd never experienced before. These people who spent their days complaining about everything from the coffee to the air conditioning suddenly had nothing but good things to say. My boss, a guy who usually communicated in grunts and disapproving looks, actually used the word magnificent. He said eating those cookies was like getting a hug from his grandmother, which was saying something since the man had the emotional range of a brick wall. By noon, the container was empty, and people were asking if I had more home. By the end of the week, I was getting requests to bring cookies for birthday celebrations and department meetings. Word spread through our building faster than office gossip, and suddenly I had people from other floors stopping by my desk asking about cookie orders. That's when the crazy idea hit me. Saturday morning farmers market. Every weekend, our downtown area turned into this bustling hub of local vendors selling everything from organic vegetables to handmade jewelry. I'd walked through it plenty of times, but I'd never considered setting up my own booth. The idea seemed insane me, the spreadsheet guy, selling homemade cookies to strangers like some kind of entrepreneur. But insane ideas have a way of growing on you when you've got nothing left to lose. I called the market coordinator, a cheerful woman named Dorothy, who sounded like she'd been running farmers markets since the dawn of time. She explained the process, the fees, the requirements. $25 for a day spot. Bring your own table and tent. Be there by 5 in the morning for setup. It sounded terrifying and exciting at the same time. That Friday night, I baked like my life depended on it. 6 different batches of those cinnamon sugar cookies, each one better than the last. My tiny apartment kitchen looked like a flour bomb had exploded, and I probably went to more butter than a French chef, but I had enough cookies to stock a small store. 5 a.m. on Saturday morning found me standing in an empty field with a folding table, a borrowed tent, and enough nervous energy to power half of Chicago. Other vendors were setting up around me. People who clearly knew what they were doing, arranging their displays with the confidence of seasoned professionals. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out how to make a folding table look inviting with nothing but a checkered tablecloth I bought at the dollar store. The first hour was brutal. People walked by, glanced at my humble setup, and kept moving toward the more established vendors. I started questioning every decision that had led me to this moment. Maybe Steve from accounting was right. Maybe this was just a midlife crisis disguised as a business venture. Then Mrs. Rogers showed up. She was probably in her 70s, with silver hair and the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd just been welcomed into someone's home. She stopped at my table, picked up one of my cookie packages, and inhaled deeply through the plastic wrapping. Her eyes closed like she was remembering something important. She bought one package, then another. Then she opened the first one right there and took a bite. I watched her face change, watched 20 years melt away as she tasted something that reminded her of her own grandmother's kitchen. She told me these cookies tasted exactly like the ones her mother used to make for church socials, back when people knew their neighbors and communities actually meant something. That's when things got interesting. Mrs. Rogers started telling other shoppers about my cookies. She became my unofficial marketing team, stopping random strangers and insisting they try a sample. Word spread through that farmer's market like wildfire, and suddenly I had a line of people waiting to buy cookies from a nervous guy with flowers still under his fingernails. By 10 a.m., I was down to half my inventory. By noon, I was completely sold out, standing behind an empty table with a cash box full of $20 bills and a head full of disbelief. In 6 hours, I'd made more money than I usually earn in a week at my day job. But here's where the story gets really wild. Some college kid with a phone had been filming the whole Mrs. Rogers interaction. She posted on TikTok with some caption about a guy from Chicago making cookies that would make you cry happy tears. I had no idea any of this was happening until Sunday morning when my phone started ringing off the hook. Turns out, the video had blown up overnight. 1.5 million views. My friend Jake was the first to call me, laughing his head off about seeing me on his girlfriend's TikTok feed. Then my cousin texted me a screenshot of the video with crying, laughing emojis. By noon, I'd gotten calls from 3 different relatives who'd seen it shared on Facebook. The comments were insane. Thousands of people sharing their own stories about grandmothers and family recipes, asking if I shipped nationwide or had any plans to expand beyond the farmer's market. Over the next few days, my phone started getting calls I wasn't expecting. First, it was just a few people from around Chicago asking if they could order cookies for pickup. Then someone from my neighborhood wanted a dozen for their book club meeting. By the end of the week, I had about 15 orders lined up for the next farmer's market, plus a couple people asking if I could deliver to their offices downtown. The problem was, I had no idea how to handle this kind of demand. My tiny apartment kitchen wasn't exactly equipped for mass production, and I was still working my day job, trying to manage spreadsheets while fielding calls about cookie orders. Something had to give. That's when I made the leap that would change everything. I found a commercial kitchen space available for rent in a warehouse district about 20 minutes from my apartment. It wasn't glamorous. Concrete floors, fluorescent lighting, and the lingering smell of whoever had used it before me. But it had industrial ovens, proper mixing equipment, and enough space to actually fulfill the orders that kept coming in. The rent ate up most of my savings, but for the first time since Mom died, I felt like I was building something that mattered. Every morning before work, I'd drive to that warehouse and spend 2 hours mixing dough and baking cookies. Every evening after work, I'd go back and do it again. Weekend became marathon baking sessions that left me exhausted but oddly satisfied. My friends thought I'd lost my mind. They'd see me at our usual hangout spots, barely able to keep my eyes open, talking about flour suppliers and packaging options instead of sports or movies. They started calling me the Cookie Monster, asking if I was planning to quit my real job to become a professional baker. The question seemed ridiculous at first, but it started eating at me. Was this really just a hobby that had gotten out of hand? Or was I accidentally building a business that could actually support me? Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. 3 hours a night became normal. Coffee became a food group. I'd catch myself falling asleep at my desk job, dreaming about cookie dough and commercial ovens. My boss started making comments about my productivity, but I was too tired to care. This double life was unsustainable, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. Because somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, I'd found something I'd been missing my entire adult life: purpose. Every batch of cookies that came out of those ovens carried a piece of my family's story. Every customer who tasted them and smiled was connected with something real in a world that felt increasingly artificial. I wasn't just making cookies. I was preserving memories, honoring the women who came before me, and somehow healing my own broken heart in the process. Standing in that warehouse kitchen at midnight, covered in flour and running on pure adrenaline, I realized I'd accidentally stumbled into the life I was supposed to be living. It was messy and exhausting and completely different from anything I'd ever imagined for myself. But for the first time since Mom died, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The orders kept coming. The phone kept ringing. And somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard Grandma Eleanor laughing with approval, proud that her recipes had found their way back into the world where they belonged. Sometimes the best discoveries happen when you're not looking for them, hidden in family recipes, and waiting for the right moment to change everything. This was bigger than cookies now. This was my rebellion against a life that had tried to break me, and I was just getting started. 3 weeks into my double life as office worker by day and baker by night, I made a decision that would either save me or completely destroy what little stability I had left. I walked into my boss's office on a Tuesday morning, hands shaking like a leaf, and handed in my resignation letter. My manager stared at me like I'd just announced I was joining the circus. 22 years with the company, decent salary, health insurance, retirement plan, all thrown away to sell cookies at farmers markets. When he asked what my next move was, I told him I was starting my own bakery business. The look on his face suggested he thought I'd suffered some kind of breakdown. Maybe I had, but sometimes a breakdown is just a breakthrough wearing a disguise. I named my brand Eleanor's Oven after Grandma Eleanor. It felt right, honoring the woman whose recipes had given me a second chance at life. I set up an Etsy shop, started posting regularly on social media, and threw myself into baking with a kind of obsession that would have worried my friends if they'd known the extent of it. The warehouse kitchen became my second home. Actually, it became my first home. My apartment was just where I went to sleep for a few hours between baking sessions. I expanded beyond those original cinnamon sugar cookies, working my way through Grandma Eleanor's entire collection. Oatmeal raisin that tasted like Saturday mornings. Chocolate chip cookies so perfect they could make grown adults cry. Snickerdoodles that transported people back to their childhood kitchens. Each recipe was like unlocking a piece of family history. Grandma Eleanor had left little stories in the margins, notes about which cookies Uncle Tommy preferred, which one sold best at church bake sales, which one she made when someone in the neighborhood was going through a tough time. I wasn't just following recipes. I was continuing a tradition of comfort and care that stretched back generations. The response was beyond anything I could have imagined. Orders started trickling in through Etsy, then flowing, then pouring like a broken dam. People weren't just buying cookies. They were buying memories, connections, pieces of home they thought they'd lost forever. The reviews made me tear up regularly. One woman wrote that my oatmeal cookies tasted exactly like the ones her deceased mother used to pack in her school lunches. A college kid said my chocolate chip cookies were the only thing that made his dorm room feel less lonely. By the end of 3 months, I cleared $60,000 in revenue. $60,000. From cookies. I stare at my bank account like it was written in a foreign language, unable to believe that Grandma Eleanor's recipes had transformed my financial situation more dramatically than 2 decades of climbing the corporate ladder ever had. I was living the American dream, the kind of success story that makes people believe in second chances and the power of following your passion. Small business owner, entrepreneur, the guy who quit his soul-crushing job to pursue his calling. It was everything I'd never dared to hope for. That's when Kate decided to remind me that happiness in our family always came with a price tag. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by certified mail like a small bomb, designed to explode my newfound peace. Legal letterhead, official seals, the kind of formal language that makes your stomach drop before you even finish reading the first paragraph. Kate was suing me for copyright infringement and misappropriation of family intellectual property. According to her lawsuit, those recipes belonged to the family estate, which she now controlled. I was allegedly stealing our grandmother's legacy and profiting from recipes that rightfully belonged to her. The legal document made it sound like I was some kind of culinary criminal, pilfering family secrets for personal gain. But here's what really twisted the knife. Kate had gone public with her accusations. She'd given an interview to one of our local news stations, positioning herself as the grieving daughter protecting her family's memory from her greedy brother. She sat there in her perfectly tailored suit, dabbing at her eyes with tissues, talking about how I was exploiting our mother's death and grandmother's legacy for financial gain. She made it sound like I was desecrating their graves for profit. The interview went viral in our local community. Suddenly, I wasn't the inspiring small business owner following his dreams. I was a selfish son who'd stolen his family's recipes and was making money off his dead relatives. The comments on the news station's Facebook page were brutal. People called me disgusting, heartless, a disgrace to my family's memory. I sat in my warehouse kitchen that night, surrounded by empty flour containers and the lingering smell of cinnamon, wondering if Kate might actually be right. Maybe I was exploiting something that didn't belong to me. Maybe I convinced myself this was about honoring family tradition when it was really just about making money and feeling important. The doubt ate at me like acid. Every recipe I'd baked, every cookie I'd sold, every happy customer review. Suddenly it all felt tainted by the possibility that I was nothing more than a thief in an apron. That's when Emma walked into my life like a ray of sunshine cutting through storm clouds. I'd noticed her at the farmer's market for weeks, the woman with the warm smile who sold artisanal bread from a booth 3 spots down from mine. She had this way of making every customer feel like they were the most important person in the world, the kind of genuine warmth that can't be faked or learned from a customer service manual. She found me sitting outside the warehouse at 11 p.m., staring at the legal papers like they might spontaneously combust if I glared at them hard enough. Instead of walking past like a sensible person would, She sat down beside me on the concrete step and asked if I was okay. I ended up telling her everything. The whole ridiculous story spilled out. Mom's death, Kate's betrayal, the recipes, the business, the lawsuit. Emma listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that made it clear she was actually paying attention instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. When I finished my tale of woe, she was quiet for a moment. Then she started laughing, not at me, but at the absurdity of the situation. Here was Kate, she pointed out, the woman who'd thrown away those recipes like they were worthless garbage, now claiming they were priceless family heirlooms. The same person who couldn't be bothered to care for our dying mother was suddenly the defender of family legacy. Emma had this way of cutting through nonsense that was both refreshing and terrifying. She told me I hadn't stolen anything. I'd rescued those recipes from the trash and breathed life into them. I'd taken something Kate considered worthless and transformed it into something beautiful that brought joy to hundreds of people. As it turned out, Emma wasn't just good at moral support. She had practical connections, too. Her younger brother, Nate, was a lawyer, fresh out of law school and looking to build his reputation by taking on cases that mattered to him. When Emma explained my situation, Nate offered to represent me pro bono, partly because he believed in my case and partly because he had strong feelings about bullies who used the legal system to intimidate people. The three of us met at a coffee shop downtown, where Nate explained the legal landscape with the kind of clarity that made me understand why people go to law school. Recipe copyright was tricky territory. You couldn't copyright a list of ingredients, but you could potentially claim ownership of specific written instructions or unique combinations. Kate's case was weak, but that didn't mean it couldn't cause me serious problems. Building our defense became a treasure hunt through my family's history. I dug through old photo albums, searching for evidence that those recipes had been shared freely within our family for generations. I found pictures of church bake sales where Grandma Eleanor had sold cookies to raise money for charity, hardly the behavior of someone guarding secret family recipes. The video I'd shot at Kate's house proved invaluable. There she was on camera, dismissing the recipe notebook as worthless junk and telling me to throw it away if I wanted. Nate called our smoking gun, evidence that Kate had abandoned any claim to those recipes long before I'd turned them into a business. We also tracked down old letters Mom had written to me over the years, including several where she'd specifically mentioned wanting me to carry on Grandma Eleanor's baking traditions. One letter, written just 6 months before she died, included a line that made me cry when I read it aloud in Nate's office. "Matthew, those recipes are meant for someone who will love them the way Eleanor did. That's you, sweetheart." Emma became my anchor during those weeks of legal preparation. She'd show up at the warehouse with coffee and sandwiches, helping me sort through documents and reminding me to eat when I got too stressed to remember basic human needs. She had this gift for keeping things in perspective. When I started spiraling into worst-case scenarios, she'd remind me that Kate was the one who'd chosen greed over family, not me. Her sense of humor kept me sane. She started referring to Kate as the Cookie Pirate and her legal team as the Fun Police. When I worried about the cost of fighting the lawsuit, she pointed out that Kate's legal fees were probably costing her more than my entire business was worth. When I worried about my reputation, she reminded me that anyone who actually knew me would see right through Kate's performance. But Emma's support went deeper than jokes and coffee deliveries. She understood what those recipes meant to me in a way that nobody else had. She'd lost her own grandmother recently and knew the ache of wanting to preserve someone's memory while the world kept spinning forward without them. She got that this wasn't really about cookies or money. It was about keeping a connection to the people who'd shaped me into who I was. As we prepared to file our countersuit, alleging that Kate's lawsuit was frivolous and designed to harass me out of business, I realized something that scared me almost as much as losing the legal battle. I was falling for Emma hard and fast at the worst possible time in my life. Here I was, facing financial ruin and public humiliation, and all I could think about was how grateful I was to have her in my corner. The night before we filed our countersuit, I sat in the warehouse kitchen with Emma and Nate, surrounded by legal documents and a familiar smell of vanilla and cinnamon. We'd built what Nate called a solid case, but there were no guarantees in the legal system. Kate had money, connections, and a legal team that specialized in intimidating small business owners into submission. Emma must have seen the fear in my eyes because she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She reminded me that I'd already survived the worst thing Kate could do to me. I'd lost my mother and my inheritance and my sense of family. Everything else was just paperwork and posturing. As we prepared to take on Kate and her legal team, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to lose everything all over again. My business, my reputation, my savings, maybe even my sanity. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I wasn't facing alone. I had allies who believed in me, evidence that supported my case, and something Kate would never understand, the knowledge that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are stacked against you. Sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones you choose, but the ones that choose you. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you find people willing to stand beside you when the fighting gets tough. As we filed our countersuit and prepared for war, I held on to that thought like a lifeline, knowing that whatever happened next, I'd given everything I had to honor the memory of the women who'd made me who I was. The real fight was just beginning. The courtroom felt colder than a Chicago winter morning, with that institutional sterility that makes you feel like you're about to be judged by the universe itself. I sat at a table that had probably seen 1,000 broken dreams and family feuds, trying not to fidget with my tie, while Nate shuffled through our evidence one more time. Kate walked in like she owned the place, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her legal team looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate law firm advertisement, perfectly pressed, intimidatingly confident, and carrying briefcases that screamed expensive billable hours. She didn't even glance in my direction, but I could feel the smugness radiating from her side of the courtroom. The media attention had exploded beyond anything I could have imagined. What started as a local news story about family drama had somehow captured the internet's collective imagination. People were sharing stories about their own grandmother's recipes, posting pictures of handwritten recipe cards, and turning my legal battle into a symbol of something much bigger than cookies. The hashtag Justice format started trending on social media, which felt surreal beyond belief. Complete strangers were posting videos of themselves baking family recipes in solidarity, sharing memories of lost relatives, and expressing outrage at Kate's attempt to claim ownership over what they saw as universal family heritage. One college kid posted a TikTok of himself making his late grandmother's apple pie while explaining how family recipes belong to anyone willing to keep the tradition alive. Emma had warned me not to read the comments, but I couldn't help myself. The support was overwhelming and heartbreaking at the same time. People wrote about losing their own mothers and grandmothers, about wishing they paid more attention to family recipes before it was too late, about the comfort that came from recreating dishes that connected them to their past. One woman shared a photo of her grandmother's handwritten recipe book, stained with decades of use, and wrote about how it was the most precious thing she owned. But the message that really got to me came from a guy named Marcus in Detroit. He'd posted a picture of himself holding a plate of cookies, explaining how his grandmother had taught him to bake before she passed away last year. He thanked me for reminding him that carrying on family traditions wasn't just acceptable, it was a responsibility. That comment made me cry right there in the courthouse hallway. Nate had prepared me for the possibility that this could drag on for months, but Judge Patricia Morrison ran her courtroom with the efficiency of someone who'd seen every type of family dispute imaginable. She was probably in her 60s, with steel gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she had zero patience for theatrical legal arguments. Kate's lawyers opened with their best shot, painting me as an opportunistic sibling who had exploited family tragedy for personal gain. They claimed the recipes represented valuable intellectual property that belonged to the estate Kate, now controlled, and that my commercial use of them constituted theft of family heritage. They made it sound like I'd robbed a bank instead of baking cookies in my grandmother's memory. But Nate had done his homework, and our evidence told a completely different story. We started with a video I'd shot at Mom's house, the one where Kate dismissed the recipe notebook as worthless junk and told me to throw it away if I wanted. Watching her own words played back in that courtroom was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. Her expensive lawyers couldn't explain away the fact that she'd abandoned any claim to those recipes long before I'd turned them into a business. Then came the letters Mom had written over the years, including the one where she'd explicitly said the recipes were meant for me. Nate read that line aloud. Matthew, those recipes are meant for someone who will love them the way Eleanor did. And I saw several people in the gallery wiping their eyes. Even the court reporter looked emotional. The real turning point came when we presented evidence of how those recipes had been shared freely within our family and community for generations. We had photographs from church bake sales in the 1980s where Grandma Eleanor had sold cookies to raise money for charity. We had newspaper clippings from local events where she donated baked goods. We even found interviews she'd given to our neighborhood newsletter about the importance of sharing family traditions with the next generation. Kate's legal team tried to argue that commercial use was different from family sharing, but their argument fell apart when Nate pointed out that Kate herself had never shown any interest in preserving or continuing those traditions. She lived 20 minutes away from our grandmother for the last 15 years of Eleanor's life and had visited maybe a dozen times total. The whole proceeding felt like having my family's dirty laundry aired in the most public way possible, but there was something cleansing about it too. For the first time since Mom's death, someone in authority was actually listening to my side of the story. Judge Morrison asked pointed questions that made it clear she understood the real issues at stake here weren't about money or copyright law. They were about family, tradition, and what it means to honor the people who came before us. When Kate took the stand to testify on her own behalf, I watched her perform the same grieving daughter routine she perfected for media. She talked about protecting our family's memory and ensuring that our grandmother's legacy was preserved with dignity. She managed to work up some tears while explaining how painful it was to see me commercializing something so sacred to our family. But Nate's cross-examination exposed the contradictions in her story with surgical precision. If the recipes were so precious, why had she thrown them away? If preserving family tradition was so important, why hadn't she learned to bake any of them herself? If commercial use was so offensive, why was she only objecting now that my business had become successful? The moment that sealed Kate's fate came when Nate asked her to name 3 ingredients in Grandma Eleanor's famous cinnamon sugar cookies. She stammered and deflected, eventually admitting she'd never actually made them herself. Meanwhile, I could have recited that recipe in my sleep, complete with all of Grandma Eleanor's handwritten notes about adding extra vanilla during the holidays. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and decisive. Recipe ingredients and basic cooking methods couldn't be copyrighted, she explained, and Kate had clearly abandoned any legitimate claim to the written collection when she discarded it. More importantly, the evidence showed that I transformed those basic recipes into something new through my own creativity and effort. The Eleanor's Oven brand belonged to me, along with everything I had built using those recipes as inspiration. Kate's face went white when the judge announced her decision. Her lawyers whispered frantically among themselves, probably calculating how much money they'd just lost on a case that should never have made it to court. As we gathered our papers and prepared to leave, Kate fixed me with a look of pure hatred and told me this wasn't over, that I'd regret not settling when I had the chance. But I felt nothing but relief and exhaustion. The fight was over, and I'd won not through legal technicalities or expensive lawyers, but because the truth had finally been heard by someone who mattered. The media circus that followed the verdict was intense, but mostly positive. Local news stations that had initially presented Kate's side as legitimate suddenly shifted to portraying me as the underdog who'd stood up to family bullying. The social media support exploded into a full-blown celebration, with thousands of people sharing their own family recipe stories and thanking me for defending the right to keep traditions alive. But the real surprise came exactly 1 week after the court victory, in the form of an overnight delivery envelope that would change everything again. Emma and I were sitting in my warehouse kitchen, sharing a bottle of wine, and finally allowing ourselves to celebrate, when the delivery truck pulled up outside. The return address made my heart skip a beat. Walmart Corporate Headquarters, Bentonville, Arkansas. Inside was a letter that read like something from a business school fantasy. Walmart's food buyers had been following my story, impressed not just by the media attention, but by the quality and authenticity of my products. They wanted to carry Eleanor's Oven cookies in 1,200 stores across the country, starting with trial run in the Midwest, and expanding nationally if sales met their projections. The numbers they were throwing around made my head spin. Minimum orders that would require me to multiply my production capacity by about 50. revenue projections that would transform my little bakery operation into a legitimate manufacturing business, support from their vendor development team to help me scale up operations and meet their quality standards. I read that letter 3 times before the reality sank in. This wasn't just success. This was a kind of opportunity that turned small businesses into household names. The kind of break that most entrepreneurs dream about but never actually experience. Emma was watching my face as I processed what this meant, and she started laughing at my expression of complete bewilderment. When I told her the numbers they were projecting, she nearly choked on her wine. This was bigger than anything we'd imagined when we were fighting just to keep my little business alive. But the magnitude of the opportunity was terrifying too. Meeting Walmart's demands would require everything: new equipment, a larger facility, probably employees, definitely more money than I had access to. Success at this level came with risks that could destroy everything I'd built if I wasn't careful. Emma must have seen the panic starting to creep into my excitement because she reached across the table and took my hands in hers. She reminded me that I'd already survived the worst Kate could throw at me, that I'd built something meaningful from nothing, and that I had people who believed in me and wanted to help. That's when I realized this moment wasn't just about business success or financial security. Sitting there with Emma in the kitchen where I'd spent countless hours learning to honor my grandmother's memory, holding a contract that represented everything I'd worked toward, I understood that I'd accidentally built something much more valuable than a cookie company. I'd found my purpose. I created something that brought joy to people and connected them to their own family memories. I'd stood up to a bully and won. Most importantly, I'd found someone who saw all of my flaws and fears and chose to stand beside me anyway. The warehouse kitchen that had once felt like a lonely place to hide from my problems had become the foundation of a life I'd never dared to imagine. Emma was right. I hadn't just survived Kate's attempt to destroy me. I'd thrived in spite of it, built something beautiful from the wreckage of family betrayal, and discovered that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. As we sat there planning how to handle this incredible opportunity, I thought about Grandma Eleanor and what she would have said about her simple cookie recipes becoming the foundation of a national business. I imagined her laughing with delight at the idea that her handwritten notes about adding extra love to every batch had somehow resonated with thousands of strangers across the country. The future felt vast and uncertain and full of possibilities I was only beginning to understand. There would be challenges ahead: scaling production, managing growth, maintaining quality while meeting corporate demands. But for the first time since Mom's death, I felt genuinely excited about what came next instead of just trying to survive each day. 6 months later, we opened our first real storefront in Lincoln Park, a cozy little cafe that felt like the natural evolution of everything we'd built together. The Walmart contract had forced us to completely transform our operation. We'd rented a much larger production facility on the outskirts of the city and hired 15 full-time bakers to meet the massive demand. Emma had quit her bread business to become my full partner, splitting her time between managing our expanded production team and bringing her expertise in customer service to our new retail location. She had this gift for making strangers feel like family. For the cafe itself, we hired 3 older women who brought warmth and wisdom to every customer interaction, giving them a place to share their stories and life experience with customers who needed exactly that kind of comfort. Customers started calling them our Grandma Squad, and they embraced the nickname with the kind of joy that made even the hardest days feel worthwhile. The cafe became more than a place to buy cookies. It became a community gathering spot where people shared stories about their own families, celebrated milestones, and found comfort during difficult times. We had vinyl records playing classic jazz and folk music, mismatched furniture that felt like it belonged in someone's living room, and walls covered with customer photos and handwritten thank you notes. People didn't just come for the cookies, though those remained as popular as ever. They came for the feeling of connection, for the warmth that Emma and our team created, for the sense that they were part of something larger than themselves. We'd accidentally created the kind of place that brings communities together, one cookie and one conversation at a time. The Walmart partnership had grown beyond their original projections, but we managed to maintain the quality and authenticity that made our product special in the first place. Success at that scale brought its own challenges, but it also provided a financial foundation that allowed us to focus on what really mattered, creating experiences that made people feel valued and connected. On a quiet Tuesday evening about a year after the cafe opened, I was cleaning up the kitchen when Emma found me standing there with a silly grin on my face, just appreciating how far we'd come. She asked what I was thinking about, and I told her I was remembering that first disastrous batch of cookies I'd made in my apartment, when I'd been convinced I'd never figure out how to properly honor Grandma Eleanor's memory. That's when I finally understood what she'd really left me in that old notebook. It wasn't just recipes for cookies and cakes. It was a blueprint for creating connections, for bringing comfort to people who needed it, for building community around shared experiences and common humanity. Every ingredient measurement and technique note had been infused with decades of love and wisdom that went far deeper than baking instructions. Emma was standing beside me in our professional kitchen, surrounded by the tools and equipment that allowed us to serve hundreds of customers every day, and I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life building this dream with her. Not just a business, but the family we were creating together, the community we were nurturing, the legacy we were building on the foundation of my grandmother's recipes and my mother's love. So I got down on one knee right there between the industrial mixers and the cooling racks, pulled out a ring I'd been carrying for 3 weeks while waiting for the perfect moment, and asked her to marry me in the place where our life together had really begun. She said yes before I finished asking the question, laughing and crying at the same time, telling me I was an idiot for thinking she'd say anything else. Kate showed up at the cafe one quiet afternoon about 6 months later, which surprised everyone, including me. She stood near the entrance, looking uncomfortable and out of place among our regular customers, clearly determined to say something, but unsure how to approach. When I finished helping a customer, she walked over with a kind of nervous energy that suggested she'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks. She told me she'd lost a lawsuit but was still my sister, as if blood relation trumped everything that had happened between us. I looked at this woman who betrayed me at my lowest moment, who'd tried to destroy something I had built to honor our family's memory, and I felt nothing but sadness for what we'd lost and clarity about what really mattered. I told her that being sisters and brothers isn't a title you inherit. It's a choice you make every day through your actions and priorities. She'd made her choices clear when she chose greed over compassion, legal warfare over family healing. I wished her well, but I couldn't pretend that shared DNA created obligations she'd already abandoned. She left without another word, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Some relationships can't be salvaged, no matter how much history you share or how much you wish things were different. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is acknowledge that truth and focus your energy on the people who choose to love and support you. Standing in our cafe that night, surrounded by friends and customers and our chosen family of employees, I understood that wealth isn't measured in bank account balances or real estate portfolios. Real richness comes from building something meaningful with people who share your values, from creating experiences that matter to your community, from honoring the past while building something beautiful for the future. I'm not a millionaire, despite what the Walmart contract might suggest to people who don't understand business expenses and growth investments. But I'm rich in ways that matter more than money. Rich in purpose, in partnership, in the knowledge that Grandma Eleanor's name lives on in every box of cookies we sell and every smile we create. Every morning when I walk into our cafe and smell the cinnamon and vanilla that started this whole journey, I think about the woman who wrote those recipes with her own hands, never imagining they'd eventually comfort thousands of strangers across the country. I think about my mother, who saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself and trusted me with the family traditions that mattered most. Most of all, I think about the power of small acts of love, handwritten recipe cards, homemade cookies, moment of kindness between strangers, to create connections that transcend loss and healing that transforms pain into purpose. Sometimes the most important inheritances can't be listed in legal documents or divided among heirs. Sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones that multiply when you share them with the world. That's what Grandma Eleanor really left me in that old notebook. Not just instructions for making cookies, but a masterclass in making life sweet for everyone around you. And every day, in every batch we bake and every customer we serve, we're keeping that lesson alive.